start with the next couple of questions from test 10 of college board, and this is the section 2 of writing. Here it says keep student volunteering voluntary. Now see, this is important that we just get a little context of the passage a little quickly, and reading first 2-3 lines makes sense just to get a basic idea. A growing number of public students in the United States require students to complete community service. So this is about community service in schools and children in schools. Hours to graduate. Such volunteering, be it helping at local animal shelter. So they are giving examples of what kind of community service is done. Doing this or picking up litter collection to pick up litter. Because volunteering, ing, be it helping, ing, local shelter or picking up litter. So picking up litter makes sense, that goes with this, so I'll go with D for this one. So D is my answer here. For 13th one, the writer wants a transition from the previous paragraph that helps. So we want looking for some kind of transition here. Highlight the criticism of compulsory volunteering. Okay, the context is we want to highlight the criticism of compulsory volunteering mentioned in the previous paragraph. Which choice best does this? Okay, such volunteering, be it helping a local animal shelter or this or that. Okay, here is 13th question. But critics say that making voluntary compulsion. I'm reading this last line because this is the first line of the next paragraph. There's some kind of transition related question, so I'm just trying to understand this. But critics say that making volunteerism compulsory misses the point of the act. Okay, by its very definition, volunteer work is done willingly. This makes sense. I do not see any fault in the given option by its very definition. So what are the options? Whatever the work may be, volunteer work is done willingly for men. So the type of work is not the question. The volunteer work itself is the question here. So by its very definition, volunteer work is done willingly for many students, fortunately for communities in need. Now, if I look at the context here, they are trying to criticize voluntary work if it is made mandatory. So this goes well the way it is written. By its very definition, a volunteer work is one which is done voluntarily. It's not about the type of work, it's not about anything else, it's about the voluntary work per se. So this particular option goes well if we want to counter the proposition or suggestion that voluntary work should be made compulsory. So by its very definition, voluntary work is done willingly. Okay, next. Now this is apostrophe and plurals question. As I can see here, there is an apostrophe. So what is happening here? By requiring students to do community service in order to graduate, school officials, so this is plural, so which means A, B or C should be correct, are talking about, I will not require a apostrophe here, so either of these are fine. Now I am doing a vertical comparison, are taking away students. So this one, I mean for students, let me see, students choice. So this is kind of possessive here. Students choice without anything does not make sense. So this one gone. Students choice, like just one student, and this one is for plural, so I'll go with D. Students choice. Okay, whatever it is, I'm not reading right now. I'll read the context in case required. Proponents of compulsory volunteering who are in favor of it. This is redundant, so C itself is fine. Proponents, when you're saying they would already be favoring it, so why should I add an extra detail there? Students who volunteer report increased self-esteem, so I'm talking about advantages of it, better relationship building, and this and busy schedule does not make sense. I'm looking for another advantage, which is a closer connection with community. So this makes sense. I'll go straight with this. When you quickly read other options, they do not fit in well here. Some studies have also found that students who do community service are more likely to volunteer as adults and thus affect means make change. So does affect society positively. So the subject is students. So students would affect. I can make a connection like this. This is the subject. This is the verb. Students affect and not effect. They affect the society or bring about a change in the society. So that's why affect. So this was a diction question or choice of word question. However, most researchers, you can use the test of years as well in this case. Students would affect the society, not affect the society. Effect of a medicine makes sense, but students would affect the society because they are active, they would themselves work. So this was a question of active and passive voice. And yeah, you can read that a little more in detail in case you want to. However, most research looks at the students. Okay, what is the word here? Mandatory. So it's a diction word. Coercive, forcible, imperative are the words here. And one recent study by this guy, some place, some university, did focus specifically on mandatory volunteering. See, coercive, forcible, imperative. Coercive and forcible are usually used in contexts where there is some kind of oppression going on. Here it's more academic. So in schools, something is mandatory, not coercive or forcible. It's not a condition of law or something. It's about voluntary service made by school. So I would go with mandatory itself, which is A. She found that students who were required to volunteer rushed to complete their service hours in early high school. What is this? She found that students who were required to. Okay, so what kind of question is this? Oh, semicolon and the details. All right. So what should be the case? She found that students who required to volunteer rushed to complete their service hours in early high school. Then they did significantly less regular work in 12th grade. Okay, so we are kind of combining these two clauses. She found that, so this lady found something to complete their service in early high school. They rushed. So the students rushed during the early high school. They then did significantly less. They then, so if you are introducing the subject once again, you'll either go with a full stop or a semicolon. So when you put a semicolon, you don't have to capitalize. So comma does not make sense. So A totally gone because these two sentences are complete. Rush to complete their service hours in early school. That students who require to volunteer rush to complete their service hours in voluntary school. They then did. So after this, they then again when you are repeating the subject, the comma does not make sense because they then did significantly less is a complete sentence. So a comma is usually used when both the sentences are complete. So she found that students who were required to volunteer rushed to complete their service hours in early school, and then there is a comma. So this is also a complete sentence actually. She found something. They then did. So if I combine two sentences which are complete by a comma, it's called as a comma split. That does not make sense here. So fine, I'll not go with A. School, they then, and then comma did. So why should I pause here? So this one also looks awkward. After then, I don't want to pause. School, full stop, they then. Again, there is a pause here. Does not make sense. And this one is better. Okay. Let me go to the next one. 20th. What is happening here? The options tell me that then did students who were then hours worked by students compared with students. Oh, some kind of comparison happening here. Then compared with. Now let me read the option, the whole sentence. What's happening? Okay, so rush to complete the service hours early. We made this. Did they then did significantly less regular voluntary work in the 12th grade. So significantly less voluntary work. Significantly less, which means there is some kind of comparison happening here. Significantly than 12th grade. Then the service hours of those. Hold on. So they did significantly less regular voluntary work in 12th grade. Significantly less regular. They then did significantly less regular. I'm trying to see a sentence which I would speak. So if I have to speak this, they then did significantly less regular voluntary work in the 12th grade. Then did then the students then the other students, then the service hours of those not required to. They then did significantly less voluntary work. Then did students who were not required to volunteer. This makes sense. Then did students who were not required, because they did then hours worked by compared with. So then did, I can see a did here, and that makes it the whole thing very parallel. They then did significantly less regular voluntary work in the 12th grade. Then did students who were this. So I'm making a comparison here. They then did. So they then did something. If I cut this off, they then did something less than did students who then did these students. So B looks the most logical here. They then did. So it's not the best answer. I would not probably see it like this. They then did less. They then spent less number of hours than the number of hours spent by others. I would say it like this. But instead of spent number of hours, they said did. So they then did less voluntary work than did students who were like that, not required to volunteer. So that makes the best of the given options, although it does not look very idiomatic to me. But then, out of the given options, this does not make sense. Then hours worked by. So let us just compare the others once again. Significantly less voluntary work. So you cannot compare voluntary work with hours. They then did significantly less voluntary work than hours worked by students. Compared with students, you cannot compare voluntary work with the students also. So incorrect comparison is happening in other cases. So we can very clearly find faults with the other ones, and here it's a apple to apple comparison. They did significantly less regular voluntary work than did students who were not required to volunteer. So this is like we are comparing the voluntary work with voluntary work. In other cases, it's like we are comparing voluntary work with hours and voluntary work with students. So we have to compare voluntary work with voluntary work, which is established by B. This one was tricky, of course, and the answer is B here.